BBC.
BBC Radio Newcastle.
Time 7:42. It looks like it's going to be a nice, fine, dry day for most people today. You might see the odd shower kicking around. Highs of 19 degrees Celsius. Not quite as warm as yesterday. Now, we're asking the question, do you know what your children and grandchildren are being taught in their sex education lessons in school? Is it something you've never really thought about, or is it something that worries you? Maybe you want your children to be sort of really clued up in this day and age. Maybe, I don't know, you only want them to know the basics. Well, the government's just started a review into sex, relationship and health education in our schools. And our politics reporter, Helen Richardson, is here with me this morning to tell us more. Now, Hels, why is this review happening?
Morning, Matt. Yeah, so this review is looking at the way that sex education is being taught and the current guidance that schools follow. For the last 3 years, I didn't know this, RSHE, as it's otherwise known, has been compulsory in schools. So in primary schools, the focus is mainly on healthy relationships, so looking at family and friendships. And then at secondary school, the teaching starts to focus more on things like drugs and alcohol, on sex and on having healthy, intimate relationships. But in March this year, sex education hit the headlines after the Conservative MP Miriam Cates claimed in Parliament that children were being exposed to graphic, extreme and age-inappropriate material during their classes. Now, that raised an awful lot of eyebrows, as you would imagine, and the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, quickly decided to bring forward a review that was due to happen later this year.
So, is there any evidence that children are being taught inappropriate things in schools then?
There is some evidence, but this is part of what this review is all about, really, just gathering an awful lot more evidence. So we do know that the Isle of Man government suspended all sex education lessons there earlier this year and launched an independent inquiry after parents reported that a drag queen had told 11-year-olds that there are 73 different genders. There is evidence that academy trusts and independent schools are teaching different things to mainstream schools. Now, at the moment, it is generally down to the teachers to deliver sex education, but some schools do use external agencies to come in and to teach it. So the Department for Education is reviewing all of this. It's going to work with Ofsted. It's gathering information about what is being taught in schools now, who's teaching it, whether there needs to be more specific guidance for schools and for teachers to follow, whether schools should have limits on what's being taught to children, depending on their age. But it is important to note this review isn't for all schools, it's just for state schools.
OK. And one of our local MPs is involved as well.
Yeah, Kate Osborne, the Labour MP for Jarrow, she's actually started to gather some evidence already. Now, she sits on the Women and Equalities Committee, and it held a one-off session a couple of weeks ago to get some evidence from experts ahead of this review. Now, while she's pleased the review is happening, she does have some concerns.
We have to ensure that any review doesn't censor what children are being taught in schools and that it isn't too prescriptive. We don't, we need some guidance, but we don't want it to be too prescriptive. We don't want teachers to feel like they have their hands tied behind their back in terms of, the content of it.
And what do pupils and teachers think?
Well, I really wanted to get into a school locally to ask the teachers how they feel about sex education, to talk to the pupils about what they want their sex education lessons to cover. I have approached loads of schools in the North East about this, and they either just didn't reply to me or they politely said that they couldn't help. So I haven't been able to get access to a school to speak about sex education. The Association of School and College Leaders has put out a statement about this, though, earlier this year, and it said the vast majority of schools are incredibly cautious and sensible about the teaching of RSE, and we disagree with the sweeping generalisation and inflammatory rhetoric. So that was back in March. The National Association of Head Teachers also released a statement, and it says the overwhelming majority of schools are doing nothing more than following the government's own statutory guidance, and that it's seen no evidence to suggest that there is a widespread problem with pupils being presented with age-inappropriate materials.
OK, so that's schools. What about parents, Hals? What do parents think?
Well, yeah, since I couldn't actually get into a school and find one that would talk to me about this, I thought, well, I will try the parents. So I've been asking mums in Newcastle how they feel about sex education and what they would like their children to learn in school.
I don't want my daughter knowing about that yet. She's too young. And I think it encourages them if they know what they're doing.
I've got two daughters, 8 and 7. And to be fair, I don't really want them to do sex education because they're going to come back to me and ask me the awkward questions that I've got to try and answer. So I'd sooner them not. Actually, to be fair, I'd sooner them not. They'll learn on their own, won't they?
Well, he's already learning it and he's in year 6 now, and he come out and he was just like knowing like the body parts and stuff, where babies were from and stuff like that. So it was quite revealing when he come and told us. At 12, you don't want them to know too much, but people these days know a lot more than us parents.
So as you can hear, I spoke to just a handful of mums there and their views were quite different. In fact, when I was talking to them, it was really interesting. Some of them changed their minds while I was having the conversation with them. So they started out saying, don't want my child to know anything, don't want them to get any of this in lessons. But then when I said, well, hang on a minute, what about if they start seeing things online? Yeah. They find things out from the internet, children quite young have mobile phones. They might show their friends at school. They might see things that just aren't normal. And then the mum said, oh, actually, yeah, no, we'd rather know that our children know what's okay and what isn't. So maybe they do need a bit of education around this. So some parents actually then said, I'd quite happily have open conversations with my kids at home. But some still felt sex education should be entirely the job of teachers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a really interesting talk topic. If you want to get in touch with the show and offer your thoughts, then please do on all the usual numbers. So on the whole, though, Helen, this review seems like it's being welcomed.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there is some concern this review's been a bit politically motivated, but it was due to happen anyway. It's just been brought forward. It's probably never a bad thing, is it, to scrutinise what our children are being taught in schools. Natalie Collins is an expert in domestic abuse and unhealthy relationships. She's based in Sunderland. She believes that actually parents need to be just as involved in their children's sex education as schools are.
This review has come out of some concerns, but it does feel somewhat a red herring when essentially young people are learning all about sex from porn, all about relationships from TikTok. So it's an urgent crisis that we need to respond to. And of course, there should be some sort of framework that what is being taught is appropriate and right. But actually, we need to be working to make sure parents feel equipped to have these conversations. It is not good enough for parents to just shove this onto schools. Every parent that is listening, do you feel able to talk to your kids about porn? And if you don't, you need to start doing some work so you can feel confident.
So this review is happening. When will we find out the results then?
Well, as far as we know, the government should report back with its findings in October. It may be pushed back a bit, but I'll be following it. I'll bring you the details when we find out more. In the meantime, the government says clear guidance does already exist for schools and that when it comes to sex education, it believes children should be supported to make informed decisions and those need to be factually based and age appropriate.
OK, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Helen. As Helen said there, when we get the latest on this, you will find out first here on BBC Radio Newcastle. Answer to the Kenny Cryptic Clue on the way next.
You eat at work. You use social media at work. You sometimes even